Builders. This is a podcast where we look for the helpers and find the people who are doing the work to help our community thrive. I'm thrilled to be here with our guest today, Tom van Overbeek. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Now we can go back to just having a conversation.
Okay.
Thanks, Seth. Defining what kind of community we want to live in. I love that as a starting point. How would you define that?
Well, I think we're all prisoners of our experiences. And so I grew up in Modesto, which at the time, right now isn't a particularly nice place, but when I grew up there were 30,000 people. When I was 10 or 11 years old, I'd take off on my bike in the morning and my mom would say, dinner's going to be at 6, and then you go visit your friends and when you walk downtown, people would honk at you that knew you, and the store owners would come out. And I mean, it was just a wonderful experience. And so, like a lot of people, I ended up going to the Bay Area because that's where work was. But I always craved, getting back to a smaller community. And I love Chico. I went to UC Davis, had friends here. My son went to school here. There was always a reason to come here. And so it took me 10 years to convince my wife, but started coming up here pretty regularly about 15 years ago.
I just have to comment on how reminiscent of my own story that is, because I grew up in Chico when it was a little smaller, catching tadpoles in 1 mile, be back before dark for dinner.
Yeah.
Went to Silicon Valley, had to go there to build a career to afford to come back. Took 10 years to convince my wife, but it worked. And now we're here. We've got a kid.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Why, thank you. Likewise. So, you came back.
Right.
He who has arrived returns, as they say, as Trachtman says. What made you get involved in local government? What was that path like?
Well, I think anybody that gets involved in politics, there's sort of two elements of it. One is conceit, frankly. You think you can make a difference, that you can help, that you personally can do it better than somebody else. And I admit there's some of that in me. And the second is that you see some deficiency, you see something that's important enough to you that you will spend a significant part of your time, and time is how you describe segments of life, right? You're going to spend a significant chunk of your life because it's important to you to change it and make it better. And my vision of what that means is I want this town to be like it was when you were growing up, and like Modesto was when I was growing up, so that kids can go ride their bikes in Bidwell Park, and the parents don't worry about it. And right now, they can't do that. And we need to fix it, and we can. We're in the process of fixing it.
Yeah. And so this is great because this ties in with how we define what kind of community we want to live in, right? So how do we get the park back? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, the problem with the park are the homeless people that are camped there. And they're camped there because they were allowed to camp there. And that started in 2020 with City Council passed an item that basically forbade the cops from interfering with homeless encampments and used the COVID as an excuse. And so the homeless camps just mushroomed everywhere. So as a result, in November of 2020, all four of the there were four seats up for election had been dominated by progressives, and all four of them got blown out, including a lady who'd been mayor 3 times, because people were fed up, and they wanted it fixed. And so they voted in a conservative council who's been in the process of fixing it. Why are they still there?
Well, let's start there.
Yeah. So we ended up. So we started clearing I wasn't on the council till 2022. So in 2020, they started clearing the encampments. They got sued by an outfit called Northern California Legal Services to stop them from clearing the encampments, and they cited the Boise versus Martin law, which says that you have to have shelter to send people to if you make them move, right? So
can I ask about that really quick?
Yeah.
That on the face of it makes sense to me because Otherwise, aren't they just going to pop up somewhere else once you remove them from somewhere if they don't have an actual
Yeah,
place
on
to
the
end
surface
up?
of it, I mean, from the standpoint of being a human being, it makes sense. The problem is it gets abused because you get a lot of people who say, "Well, I don't want to go to the shelter.
Right.
I choose to stay out here."
It's easier to camp.
And that describes a lot of the people that are out there now because the shelter has 200 people in it, and so the ones that want to go or have gone, there's still 50 beds available in the shelter.
Huh.
So anyway, we ended up under a settlement agreement that was dictated by a federal judge that limited our ability, so we could move people out of move encampments out, and we had the shelter to send them to, but they could refuse under the terms of the agreement to not go.
Interesting.
Or they could come back after the area had been cleared. So what happened 2 months ago is that Grants Pass brought a case to the Supreme Court and got into the same kind of trouble that we did with the federal judge, and they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overruled the Boise decision. So the law that underlies our settlement agreement was overturned by the Supreme Court. And under Rule 60 of the Federal Code, underlying law gets overturned, then you can have the agreement set aside. So right now, we petitioned the judge to do that, and I frankly don't think the judge has really any choice because the Supreme Court ruled unequivocally 6-3
Wow.
that you don't have the right to squat in public spaces, and cities have a right to enforce their quality of life laws. So, sorry for the long-winded explanation, but
No, I'm
if we
interested.
want to get back to a high quality of life, whether it's downtown or in the park,
Yeah.
the first thing that has to happen is that the homeless people need somewhere to go, but they have to go there. It's not their choice to squat in public places because when they do, they destroy it for everybody else. I mean, nobody walks through the plaza right now.
Yeah.
Downtown we had a woman that was threatened with a knife, a guy that threatened 3 separate people, a woman with a 7-year-old child. We had a guy this morning who went to the bathroom right on the middle of the sidewalk in front of Starbucks downtown, right? So that doesn't lead to a high quality of civic life. So that stuff has to be stopped, and as soon as we get out from under the settlement agreement, it will be.
Yeah. So I've also heard that Annie Bidwell, when donating this land,
Yeah, you can't camp in the park.
stipulated. Yeah. So
You can't drink alcohol or camp in the park, both of which have been flagrantly violated. Right.
interesting. This is so fascinating. I want to also, though, steer it a little bit back to you, if I may. So you raised in Modesto,
Yeah.
came to Chico. What was your young life like beyond getting free roam of the park and whatnot? What was your family life like?
My mother was an attorney, and my father was a plant research scientist.
Awesome.
And we had a vineyard, and then the vineyard was sort of a hobby,
Yeah.
And people say, "Oh, that's so cool." The wine that was made from our grapes was sold in gallon jugs with screw tops. This is Central Valley, right? Okay. So nothing particularly romantic about a vineyard, I can tell you. So I spent a lot of my youth working in the vineyard.
Cool.
And what you learn if you're a farmer is, because a vineyard is another kind of farm,
Of course.
is that nature has a cycle. There's a seasonal cycle, and certain things have to happen at certain times. You have to get the pruning done before the buds come out,
Yeah.
and you got to pick the fruit when the sugar and the water content is exactly right.
All of
And
which is a metaphor for the rest
all
of
that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you're tired or you feel like doing something else, you have to make it happen. And
Yeah.
so we had 20 acres, which is not, as my dad described it, not big enough to make any money, but big enough to be a huge pain in the ass.
Keep you very busy.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, but it was a great experience because it taught me what work was about, and that you have to be disciplined, and that's just life. It's the way life works. And kids that don't grow up with that, they miss something.
Yeah. I agree. I definitely spent a lot of time in the garden growing up. We didn't have 20 acres, but we live over on Arbutus. My mother, who's also an attorney, always said you can learn everything you need to know about life working in a garden, working with plants.
That's interesting.
Understanding animals, understanding discipline, like you said, understanding that, especially in Chico, if you skip watering for 3 days, anything in a pot is in trouble.
That's right. And when you have to move quick and when you have to wait and all those things, right?
Absolutely. And so that's clearly where you learned some of your discipline. Where do you think the caring about your community came from? And what is it about you that didn't just pursue something that is detached from that? How come you wanted to be involved, and why do you care?
Yeah, I think I got that from my mother. She was the chairman of the Democratic Party.
Really?
She was misguided politically, but a wonderful woman.
Okay.
I don't know. I just think there are people who, look, life has been good to me, and I think a lot of people who have been fortunate in life. I worked hard, but I'm also very clear that I've been very lucky.
Sure.
You have an obligation to help out other folks, right? And if you can help and use whatever gifts you have, people have different gifts.
Yeah. I feel exactly the same way, that there's an obligation. What do you think that comes from, and why is it that not everybody feels that?
I think if you were raised Catholic or Jewish, like if a kid fell off a bike a block away, my mother would convince me it was my fault, And I think there's a sense, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but there's a sense of obligation and community, and the more, you see it with the Jewish community, people helping each other. You see it in the Mexican community. Wherever a lot of ethnic Chinese, these ethnic minorities tend to help their own, right? So I'm rambling a little bit here, but it's hard. It's just something that is with me, and I feel an obligation to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm also enjoying it, and partly because we're getting a lot of stuff done that needed to get done.
Right. Yeah, it certainly does seem there's like a cultural component to how you're taught about how much you care and how much you're owed and how much you owe for your luck or for your hard work. That's interesting. I definitely think that
it's a sense of responsibility. It's like if you have been fortunate enough to be successful, and then you have a responsibility to perpetuate the system that made that possible for you and help other people succeed also.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a segment of the population that cannot help and needs help, like disproportionately?
Well, sure. If you look at, I forget what the bell curve of distribution of naturally occurring phenomena, right? And so, if it's height, there's a few people on the left-hand side of the curve that are really tall. There's a bunch of people in the middle that are 5'8" or 5'9", talking about men are 5'10", and then there's some really short people on the other end. And the same thing has to do with, every society creates an environment, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a different environment than, say, communist Russia. Mm-hmm. But there's always a set of rules that governs behavior in a society. Mm-hmm. And some people adapt really well, and some people don't adapt well at all, and a bunch of those are camped across the street over here, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the way it's always been in every system.
Yeah.
But what we've allowed to have happen in Chico and California is to have the least functioning 0.25% of the population define the experience for the other 99.75% living, define the experience of our civic life. And that's wrong-headed and just wrong.
Yeah.
And it punishes the vulnerable, particularly older people and children, right? Because it prescribes what they can do. I can't tell you how many older people I know, and I'm one of them. But I go downtown all the time, right? That doesn't bother me. But there are a lot of older people, particularly women, who won't go downtown because they're frightened.
Yeah.
They're frightened by, mentally ill people wandering around mumbling and, all the things you see
Yeah, I was
periodically.
chased out on 1 mile by unleashed pit bulls with my 5-year-old daughter not long ago.
Yeah, that can't be allowed.
It was a shock. It was so unlike.
Yeah.
I used to go without my parents to that park.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What is the obligation for people like us who are in a position who life has been kind to, we have privilege, we've worked hard, and what is our obligation to the folks who can't adapt? And how do we weigh that?
Well, so the way I think of it, a lot of people will say, oh, it's so complicated. And when people say something is complicated, it means they don't understand how to deal with it. That's what they're really saying. It's not complicated. It's very simple.
I love that framing.
So there are people who want to help themselves. They got into a situation because of some bad luck. You got to remember 79% of the homeless people they surveyed in San Francisco, this was about a year ago, have been incarcerated. Mm-hmm. Right, so you're dealing with they're human beings, but they're people who've had problematic life experiences. So you have people who've, for whatever reasons, made some bad choices. They got into that situation, or they made some really stupid choices, started using drugs, and they realize they need to get out of it and get their life back, or they're going to die. Those people die in the tents 5 times the rate of the rest of the population. So anybody who wants to help themselves, I want to do everything I can to help them. But you have to distinguish between helping people, giving people a hand up as opposed to a hand out, right? And so the core philosophical difference between the left and the right is the agency, the role of agency of the individual in their life. So what that means is you got to play the cards you're dealt. So if you're a conservative like me, you say, well, yeah, maybe your mom was mean to you and your dad didn't let you get a new bike, and then he took off with the neighbor lady, but you have to go live your life and try as hard as you can because you don't have any choice, right? Yeah. If you're a progressive, you say, oh, well, that person who's homeless, they had all this bad stuff happen to them, so it's not their fault. Well, of course, the reality is probably somewhere in between. But you can't help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves. Yeah. And if you bring them food and drugs and needles and let them stay in a tent, all you're doing is enabling them to die faster. They die at 50 years old, 5 times the rate of the rest of the population. So one of the things I really like about the Jesus Center is they used to be a soup kitchen, so anybody could wander in, they feed them, right? They changed that program about 7 or 8 years ago and said, look, we don't want to waste time with people. If people don't care about themselves, why should we? Yeah. Right? And I'm paraphrasing. Sure. They might express the idea differently. So they're focused on people, getting people on a path to get out of the situation and become self-sufficient and productive members of society. And that's what I think our role is. If we pander to people so for example, they just cleared Tykert Ponds for the 4th time, the campers there. There were 13 people camped there. 12 of them have been offered shelter and refused to go. Wow. Well, once this Rule 60 motion gets done, they either have to go to the shelter or they're going to have to go to Gridley or Biggs. But we can't allow them to disrupt our civic life.
I think that's really well said. And I love that you are so compassionate about this stuff, because I think that that's another thing that reaches people, is that to not be cold about it, but to understand that the distinguishing factor is, will you be willing to help yourself? Right? It's not what do you deserve, what do you owed, what needs to happen. It's like, meet me halfway or part of the way to help.
Yeah, you're not doing anybody any favor by enabling them to stay in their tent and do drugs. Yeah. I mean, that's not,
For places that folks can go, and I know we've kind of honed in on this homelessness issue, and we can talk about other stuff too.
It's the most important issue for people in Chico.
Yeah. Who's doing the most to help with this? And I'd love to just kind of shed some light on, I know you mentioned the Jesus Center, the pallet
Yeah.
shelter.
Well, there's a couple of different tiers. So the low barrier shelter, which means you can come in and have dogs, but you have to behave yourself because these are congregate environments. It's a tourist shelter.
Okay.
They do great work. Last time I checked, they had 30 or 40 vacant, empty beds available. There's the Genesis shelter, which is the 177 tiny homes that's run by the Jesus Center. They're also doing tremendously good work, and sort of at another level is Chat, is Bob Troush. We talked about Bob.
Yeah.
And what they do is provide low-cost housing for people. So they'll either buy or lease a house and then rent the bedrooms, and then provide services. I mean, it's really a great program.
How excellent. How can someone who is, hearing or seeing this and is interested and says, I didn't know about those things, could they get involved? How could they help?
Well, it's money and time,
Yeah.
so they can get a hold of those organizations and say, you can write them a check and make a contribution, or you can say, hey, how can I help? Can I serve food, or what can I do?
How about it's for substance abuse stuff? What are your options in town if you are in a tent doing drugs all day? What can we do for those people, or if they're willing to?
Well, again, they have to want to help themselves. So we have a sobering center that just opened up. But the problem with drug addiction, and the problem, especially with the new forms of these drugs, is it's like falling into a well. You can't. It's really hard to get out, and a lot of people never do. I'm trying to remember the exact number, but the number of times people go to rehab before they finally kick it is over 10.
Wow.
But they go through this process and then they slip back and then they go through it again. But one of the problems is that Proposition 47, which was passed about 10 years ago, basically legalized hard drug possession. It became a misdemeanor. But the police, so I do ride-alongs with the police periodically, and one of the ones we did about 6 months ago stopped a guy that had 2 bikes. One was clearly stolen.
I wonder if it was mine.
It could have been. The cop I was with searched him. Turns out he had meth. He confiscated the meth and let the guy go. And I said, well, why didn't you arrest him? He said, well, it's a misdemeanor. I said, well, can't you cite him? He said, yeah, it takes an hour and nothing ever happens to him. So we're just told, don't bother.
Wow, for meth.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can steal $950 a day, and nothing happens to you if you do that, right? So you put those two things together, and you go sleep in your tent, go steal some beer and some food, and maybe a few things to sell to buy drugs, and hey,
It seems too that like the threshold for how uncomfortable your life has to be for that to be more comfortable has changed.
Well, if you're high enough, it doesn't matter,
right? I guess.
And so, but one of the things you have to understand is, in places like Texas and Florida, where they have 1/4 the rate of homelessness of California, it's punishable to use hard drugs. You get punished if you steal, and if you're homeless, they say, okay, come with us. You've got. If you break a law, you can't sleep in public places, but if you get picked up, the judge says you can go to rehab or you can go to jail, pick one. And they don't pander and enable people to stay in that dependent situation. They help them get out of it, and that works. So one of the things that always puzzles me is these so-called compassionate liberal people, that claim to be smart. You can look at other states that have been very successful at dealing with homelessness. Texas cut it in half, the rate of homelessness. In California, we have half the unhoused homeless people in the country, and we keep doubling down on the same stuff that made it so awful here. And the only conclusion I can come to, because again, these progressive people claim to be smart, is they want those homeless people out there because they are visible evidence of the failure of capitalism. And they're socialists. So our senior elected official, my buddy Mr. Winslow, makes no bones about being a socialist, right? And so those people, they want those homeless people out there. They don't want to get them off the street, because then, you think about the society. Every important element of our social fabric is under siege. The family, right? The idea of work. The decriminalization of so many things. And it's I think it's done on purpose.
Do you think that they're actively wanting the homeless people as a visibility
Absolutely
thing?
Oh yeah. Why do they feed them in the park? They feed them in the plaza, in the city plaza, 6 times a week. People feed them, so they congregate. They're like pigeons, You feed them in the park, and they all come around.
Interesting. Is there an end goal to that plan that you see, or is that just
Which plan?
Of feeding people in very visible places, or like encouraging, I guess more visibility of?
Well, whenever you serve people food to the public, you have to get there are certain standards you have to meet, and you have to get a permit. So if people want to feed the homeless, that's fine. But the plaza is the living room of the city, right?
It does seem a little theatrical.
Well, of course it is.
Yeah.
And so that's the wrong place to do it. So we need to find a place where they can do it that's not, and they will fight us tooth and nail. By the way, just to tell you how cynical these people are, is Northern California Legal Services people, they sued the city for almost $700,000 for the settlement agreement. That's what the financial settlement was. The 5 plaintiffs got $3,000 apiece, and the law firm got $675,000. So charity is a damn good business,
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen in these next elections? And how do you think, if the city council stays the same or changes, what are the effects that's going to have on the city itself and on our community? There's a whole new batch of candidates running. I don't know much from the conservative side, but I have heard from Addison who's running and what their plans roughly are.
So it is so a couple things. Addison's district, we'll take my district. My district is 4-3 Democrats Republican registration, which says that if everybody was if you assume the independents break the same way, if everybody who was a progressive voted for the progressive candidate and everybody who's conservative voted for me, I would have lost by 12 or 15 points, but I won by 18 points. So there's a 30-point swing of people who don't like people who register as Democrats because they hate Donald Trump, but they still want to have a functioning town, right? Addison's district, which is probably the most progressive, was 3-1 Democrat registration, 75-25. So again, if everybody had voted progressive in his district for him, and the conservative candidate had received everybody who was registered Republican, he would have won by 50 points, but he only won by 20 points.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's a significant swing up to 30 points of people who are registered as Democrats but want to have the town work. They want the roads to get fixed. They want cops to be able to have enough cops so they show up if there's a problem. They don't want to deal with homeless downtown or camped in the park. So what's happened since 2020 is we've made huge strides. The council was elected in 2020, and then in 2022, Addison and I came in. But it's a conservative council, so the infrastructure neglect was criminal, literally.
Wow.
The flood control structure at Lindo Channel wasn't maintained for 40 years.
Wow.
And with the park fire and the runoff of the park fire, I don't go off on that tangent, but we're really exposed for flooding because of the park fire and the fact that the bypass is clogged up with debris from 40 years of neglect.
Wow, I haven't heard that yet.
The sewers downtown were put in 1908, and they were supposed to last 75 years. So you can do that. They've been timed out for 40 years.
Oh, no.
Nobody needs to explain to anybody how terrible the roads were around here. And we're spending $115 million in this fiscal year and the next on road reconstruction, which also has a significant bicycle infrastructure component, which is, I think, really important. Our police department was literally melting down, and so that's been rebuilt. We only had one half of a traffic cop for a town of 109,000 people. Now we have 4.5. I mean, we had 11 people die the year before last in traffic accidents in the city limits, but because we weren't spending money on traffic enforcement.
Yeah.
And the homeless, everybody understand, we had homeless people camped everywhere. We made that a lot better because of the settlement agreement. Settlement agreement's going to go away, and so we're going to really be able to enforce that. So given all the progress that we've made, and it's incomprehensible to me that people would want to go back to the way it was in 2020. So do I think we'll lose a couple seats? Maybe. But people have seen what it's like after 40 years of liberal governance, and it's a complete mess, right? And we're starting to fix, and you can see the difference, right? I mean, there's significant differences in infrastructure, police presence, homelessness. I mean, the pallet shelter. I mean, there were the left, they never got a pallet shelter. They got a shelter built, and we got one built, 177 units. So
it's impressive, yeah.
Yeah, so I expect the council to remain conservative, although I expect our majority to not be 6-1. I think it'll shrink a little bit. But if the other side does win, you can bet that everything that we're doing will be unraveled. Homeless will be camped wherever they want to camp. That they don't think we should fix roads because you can ride your bike or just build better bike paths, and the police make them feel unsafe. So what we'll have is more city ordinances declaring. We have a city ordinance declared Chico a nuclear-free zone. So I just want you to know, if you decide you want to either assemble or test a nuclear device in the city limits, it's against the law.
Got to go to Biggs, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. You will. Now, whether the only thing you can get really punished for in California, I think, is using a plastic straw. So I don't know if anything bad would happen to you, but
a turtle maybe.
It's against the law. And the climate action, all this climate action stuff. So the climate's a real issue, but the city of Chico is not going to make any difference, right?
And that actually goes perfectly into the segue I was thinking of next. You mentioned a little bit ago that the number of people registering to vote because they don't like Donald Trump.
There are Democrats who vote conservative, yeah.
Oh, interesting. And so that kind of, it harkens to something I've been thinking about a lot, which is that people get so consumed with the national politics that they lose sight of local stuff. All of the local things that can be done that still need to be done.
It becomes tribal, very tribal.
And it has shocked me how little people know about who's representing them, who is making the decisions in our community, and what can be improved at this level that then cascades all the way up to that level. They just want to jump over and worry about the president.
Well, it's because the city. The city does a lot of things well, but one of the things it's lousy at is communicating. It's getting the word. That's why I'm very happy to be here with you, so we can tell the story.
Yeah.
By the way, I have a podcast series called Fixing Chico.
Yes, I love
it. If you Google Fixing Chico, I've got 7 or 8 podcasts on housing, police, downtown, all that stuff.
Well, great minds, I guess. This is awesome, and 100%. It seems to me that when you start looking at who's doing the work locally, who is getting their hands dirty, who is putting up shelter and enforcing laws that are going to make the community thrive, it stops becoming, national politics man bad and starts becoming there's helpers in this community. There are people right here who are willing to wake up early and do the work.
Well, and there's a surprising amount of cooperation between So Addison, for example,
and that's where I was going next.
I like the guy,
and you work together.
And
you
we
guys
work
do
together,
great things
and
together.
We're co-chairing a committee on growth and community development.
That's
We collaborate a lot on where we want downtown to go because we have very similar visions. I mean, he thinks everybody's going to be on a bike, and I think cars are going to be around for a while, and they might be electric. But we have to. But we work through that stuff. And
Yeah.
the point is, one of the things I really respect about him is he's trying to figure out how we can work together where the common ground is, instead of amplifying the differences and throwing rocks at each other.
That's what I respect so much about both of you, is that you do work together and you...
That's how you get things done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you both are doing good work on, like you said, you have similar visions. Because
on some things.
On some things,
not
sure.
everything. Yeah.
But especially the more local you get, the answers get a little easier. I really liked what you said about, this isn't complicated.
This
is easy. Like, once you, at the end of the day, when you get down to these issues, do you want an unleashed pit bull there or do you not? And everybody pretty much lands in the same place until it gets, a little bit more vague or nebulous as to like what we're actually saying, or like perhaps performative or theatrical publicity stunt type things. I think when it comes to like having a safe downtown, most of us are on the same page about that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think if you take the time to think about what your priorities are, so one of the problems with progressive governance is they've decided that the welfare of the homeless is the priority, as opposed to the quality of civic life for the people who live in the town first.
Yes.
And then how do you take care of the underprivileged second? The underprivileged have always been there, but they weren't living in the city plaza.
Right. Yeah, and it's true that I think for anyone in the community, it's important to understand that you don't have to agree with Addison or Tom on every single issue.
No.
As long as you can find the things you do agree on and do the work to get them done,
right,
that's going to create a stronger community.
And that covers a lot of ground.
Right. I'm tempted to ask you about Tammy Ritter, just because I know she's going to say such wonderful things about you. How do you think her vision is different from yours?
I don't think that she would. I don't want to put words in her mouth.
And that's very fair.
Tammy. So I met Tammy because this was maybe 15 years ago. I was trying to understand the homeless thing better, and somebody said you need to talk to Tammy because she has a background in social work and was on, I think, on the city council at the time. So. I had lunch with her, and she just blew me away with just her knowledge and the depth and nuance of her understanding. She's extraordinarily bright, but also she's very realistic about the people that you can help and the people that aren't, not worth the effort. She's very pragmatic, but she's a different set of life experiences.
Yeah,
and so. That gives you a different outlook, and but we work together on. The county and the city sometimes there's an overlap.
Yeah,
and I just really respect the fact that she does her homework. She's very bright, and she'll work with people that don't agree with her.
Yeah, and again,
she's an example of just a superb public servant.
I love that.
I just wish she were on our team.
Yeah. Well, who knows what the future holds? There might be.
I doubt it with her, but
maybe there'll be a new team altogether that's Team Chico. I love that you said that one of her great qualities is she's willing to work with people she doesn't 1,000% agree with on every single thing, because I think that's one of those qualities that makes someone good for this community, right? Yeah. Someone who isn't completely dogmatic about their way or the highway, right? It's people who go, look, like, I'm absolutely opposed to your views on this thing, but we need to add more parking spaces here, or we need to enforce this rule to keep the park safe here, and to set those things aside and to put Chico first, which is what the folks I'm talking to, I feel like that's one of the threads. That's one of the continuities.
Everybody has a different idea what that means, though. Right?
Yeah.
So my idea might be different it is different than Addison's, for example. But, I'm 40 years older than he is, so that gives you a different perspective.
Yeah, he's young.
He's very young, yeah.
How do you feel about... I think a lot of the new candidates running are younger. How do you feel about that? What does that say about Chico?
Well, let me just say that when you go to work, let's say you go to work in an organization, if it's whatever, the state, the police department, a company, the young people start out in training jobs, and then they get low-level jobs, and then as they get experience and knowledge, they move up. And just because you read a book and went to a good school and had good grades doesn't mean you really understand anything at all. And so now part of it is I'm older, and so I happen to think that being older is a very good thing. Experience is a very good thing.
The older I get, the more.
So I have a bias. I have a bias here, and but I think the younger people running on the left this time have some very simplistic ideas, unrealistic and simplistic ideas. Let me put it another way. They all sound like my children did when they came home after the first semester of their freshman year in college.
Okay, that's
Right?
fair. Yeah. I certainly felt that I knew more at that age.
Oh, everybody does, because you know, if you think of
Yeah.
knowledge as a series of concentric circles.
Yeah.
So if you don't know much, you think, you know, the stuff you don't know is, and the circumference of that circle is pretty small.
Yeah.
So you say, I have this figured out.
Right.
And the more you know, the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know.
Yep.
And so, which can be is paralyzing for a lot of people,
Yeah.
right? Because yeah, but when you actually get in the job of being on a city council, if you take it seriously and you really dig into it, you realize that there are, you know, personalities and hidden agendas, and people have misunderstandings. You know, the public. So you want to do something that's you've convinced it's the right thing to do, but you've got a bunch of people who don't want to do it, and they're going to vote for the other guy the next time you run. And you know, working all that stuff out is there's a lot of art to it, and it takes life experience. I mean, how do you? It's all about persuasion, and it's not just I'm right, and if you don't agree with me, you're clearly immoral and stupid.
Yeah.
Right. That's not the way to win minds and influence people.
Nope, that's way too reductive. It's actually the way to polarize people, right? To push them away.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Which is what we've done way too much in this country. And I think people are tired of it.
Couldn't agree more. I could
I'm
not
tired
agree
of
more.
it.
Yeah,
So.
I want to see folks working together. I think the potential this town has, this community has, is just it's massive.
It's a fabulous place.
It's massive. And
Yeah. We have to get responsible people, capable people in positions of responsibility, and not children.
what do you think they would say to that?
Why do we have all these old geezers running things? I guess, I don't know. That's what I would say when I was 25.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. What is your advice to a young Tom listening to this? To someone who is maybe coming home from their first semester of college, and they do care and they want to get involved, because that's one of the things I do see in them. Not that I know them
But
very
my
well,
advice in but what's the context?
Yeah, so let's say for someone who does want to get involved in local government, or even a step back to just help the community, what would you say to a 21-year-old?
Well, I find out or decide what's important to you. So maybe it's about bicycle safety, and Chico Velo does advocacy for bicycle safety, or maybe it's the park, or if it's helping, children, you could be a tutor. I mean, the opportunities are endless, right, to help. But just put yourself out, find out the people that are doing the things you're interested in. But it has to be something you love and you're really interested in. Otherwise, you just won't sustain it. You can't, at least for me. It has to be something that I have some emotional connection with.
And why do you think you have that emotional connection with it? What is the rewarding side of caring about your community and helping?
Well, it's rewarding now because we're actually getting things done. It would be very frustrating if we couldn't. I mean, Addison must be very frustrated because he keeps proposing things and don't get seconds, and But my side has a 6-1 majority, And so we're fixing the roads, we're rebuilding the police department, we're dealing with the homeless thing aggressively. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's happened in kind of under the covers at the city, getting the IT systems working properly, getting the engineering organization at Public Works working well. But it's the feedback loop, right? So you do something and it works. Either you say, "Oh, I like that video I did," or people say that was a great job. Then you want to do it again, right? And if they have the opposite reaction, you tends to push you off in a different direction, right?
Absolutely. What do you think it is about Chico that inspires people like you to do what you do?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily unique to Chico. I mean, I think people love communities for different reasons. I mean, you have people that do this kind of stuff in New York, right, because they love the town. But I do think that the smaller the community, the more personal connection there is, and the closer you are to, the people in the various organizations. I mean, this is a small enough place that, when I walk through City Hall, I know who's sitting behind the desk and what they do and what they're good at and what they need to work on and all that stuff. And that makes it, for me, very satisfying. I don't think I'd be as interested in a city with a couple million people. I just don't think it would have the same human connection.
It feels different in the Bay Area or elsewhere. Yeah. Relevant to stuff we've talked about in the past, Brendan Fraser just got cast as Eisenhower. Something coming out in a year or two.
Wow.
And I meant to send you the trailer to that World War II Flying Fortress show.
I'd love to see that.
You'd love that. Yeah, let me send you a link to that. That's what you were saying. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a primitive damn thing.
Unbelievable, those things. You'd freeze to death, right? In that.
Well, 60 below.
Yeah.
These guys were, how do you pee when it's 60 below?
Yeah,
right?
Not without getting frostbite on your thighs, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think they have tubes, actually. But still, God. I mean, the windows, were open on the sides for the gunners.
Yeah, right. I know. Just, the flak coming up on that. You've got to see that series. I'll send you a link.
No, I would love. It's fascinating airplane.
Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to say that I didn't touch on that you were like, you came here with a scripted? I want to make sure I get this.
I didn't script anything.
Okay, perfect.
No. But I would like to talk a little bit about the flood control.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Situation.
Let's talk about that.
So. In 1955, I'm old enough to remember that, there was a huge flood. Downtown Yuba City had 7 feet of water in it, and had a levee breach.
Yeah.
And so, in response to that, the state passed Proposition 1 in 1960, which was a state water project. And they built Oroville Dam and Bullard's Bar Dam in part to provide flood control, and a part for the other reasons you have for hydroelectric power and recreation, all that stuff. Part of that state water project was building the Lindo Channel, which protects downtown from flooding if Little Chico Creek overflows. That was built in, that was spec'd in 1960, probably designed before that, but it was finished about 1968. Sorry, I'll get to the short version. And the idea was that every year after high water, because high water comes and it brings down rubble. If you go look at the bottom, a bunch of rocks the size of softball to volleyball size. They stopped maintaining it 40 years ago for a variety of reasons, mainly just because they were worried about nuclear-free zones, and I don't know. They stopped maintaining it. So I found out about it from the guy who used to be responsible for flood control for Butte County. He said, this is a big friggin' problem. If we have another winter like 95, 96, 97, when we had really high water.
My basement flooded.
So the bottom of that channel is 8 feet higher than it was designed to be. There's a concrete weir that's completely buried, and then the width of the channel is only 60% of the original spec.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, which means that now compounding it, so that's bad enough, but we had this park fire, which burned a bunch of the watershed. So what the hydrologists are telling us is, for a given amount of rain, the rain's going to come down, the water's going to come down faster and over a shorter period of time than if the vegetation were holding the water and it's kind of metering it out.
And there's no
3 to 4 times the peak water flow. So if we have anything like a wet winter, we're in trouble. So the city's been working really hard because it's a joint city county thing, to do a variety of things. One of the things we're going to do is position heavy equipment, so if it looks like there's a big storm coming in, they can jump in there and move about as much of it as they can.
Yeah.
But that's got to get fixed, and that's an example of just literally criminal neglect of infrastructure.
Is that what can we do?
Well, what we are doing. So the first thing is to size the problem. So we had a consulting firm who's going to give us, I think, a report in the next few weeks about how much material is there, what the original spec was, what do we have to do to get it back to that spec. And then, we have to talk to this is California, right? Department of Fish and Wildlife, because they're birds nesting in the trees, the Department of Water Resources. Probably talk to Army Corps of Engineers, but they're relatively simple. But if this were Texas, somebody would have said, holy cow, we need to fix this now. And the next morning there would have been people moving the stuff out of there and it would have been done. Right? So
how interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so we are moving as quickly as we can. But there's a real sense of urgency around it after this fire, which has compounded the risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's very explainable, understandable that without that vegetation.
Well, but people like Addison and the other people running and left, they don't have a clue about any of this.
Is it on
Not
their
the slightest
radar
clue.
at all,
No.
or that's just not?
No, they don't think about that. They're worried about DEI and how many electric cars the city has, which quite a few actually, and their priorities are not Chico-centric. I mean, climate change is not something we're going to fix in Chico, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Really fascinating stuff.
Oh, it's a lot of fun to do this job. I mean,
Yeah.
it's people say, "Don't you hate it?" I love it.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that. What makes it fun?
Well, we're getting things done that are worthwhile that
Yeah.
need to get done.
Yeah.
And so I had the great good fortune to get elected to the council when we had, I can't think of a better word, a pregnant situation, right? There were all these things that clearly needed to get fixed, and nobody seemed to be dealing with it. And so the council was elected in 2020, and then 2022, we're moving decisively to deal with this stuff.
Yeah.
Downtown's a whole nother conversation about what has to happen there. But we're getting it done, and we're going to get back to the kind of town we grew up in.
Tom, I'm grateful to have you in this community. I appreciate the hard work you're doing. I hope that more people can see you, can resonate with your why, and get involved in the way that you have. Thanks for
As long as they
joining
don't
us
live in
today.
my district and run against me.
Deal. What district?
6.
District 6.
Yeah.
Tom van Overbeek of District 6.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.